Tonight's presentation is Earning Your A&P Certificate Through Practical Experience. Our presenter tonight is Jim Moss. Jim grew up in Alaska, and he's a commercial pilot and a CFI for helicopters and airplanes. He's interestingly, his dad bought a Roadaway helicopter franchise back in 1980, so he has a couple of Roadaway helicopters under his belt as construction projects, as well as some restoration projects of BC-12D and some other stuff that he's worked on over the years. Lives in Tucson, works in Alaska. That sounds like a pretty good gig to me, flying a Twin Otter, where he's both the mechanic and safety officer. And as a result of his dual residency, he's also a member of 4 EAA chapters. With that, I want to welcome Jim. Jim, welcome aboard tonight.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you all to joining us. I'm just delighted to be here.
And Jim, I went ahead and turned the screen over to you, so you should be able to accept the presentation at this point. There we go. Everything looks good on my end.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Charlie. I entitled this presentation as I did because I wanted to address a couple of things right up front, things that are often misunderstood. Earn your A&P certificate through practical experience. First, it is not technically an A&P certificate. You will be earning an airman certificate, mechanic category, with ratings of airframe and or Powerplant. And second, you don't actually earn this certificate through your practical experience. What you do is through practical experience, documenting the minimum required amounts, you will earn the right to take the tests, the FAA tests, that will then earn you your certificate. So I just wanted to clarify that right up front. What I was hoping to talk with you all about this evening is a couple of things. It's how to gain the experience, and equally as important, how to document it for the purpose of satisfying that practical experience requirement, which is necessary to earn that mechanic certificate. So here's the nomenclature. Actually, you would be earning an airman certificate in the category of mechanic, and under that, airframe or Powerplant. Those are ratings, and therefore it's not misunderstood in the industry when you say you've got your airframe and Powerplant or your A&P ticket. I guess folks probably understand what you're talking about, but I wanted to be sure that you really knew that as well. You know, just for reference, this is just like earning a private pilot certificate, because you earn a private pilot certificate, and then under that you have a rating such as single engine land, maybe single engine sea, maybe you're really lucky you've got multi-engine land, but it's all under the private pilot certificate category. So again, I hope that will clear that up. The basic requirements for earning this certificate are pretty straightforward. 18 years old, and of course read, write, speak, and understand English. The regs ask for 18 months of practical experience for earning either the Powerplant rating or the airframe rating. That's 18 months, that's 40 hours a week, 4 weeks a month, that's 160 hours a month times 18 months, that's 2,880 hours. Or if you wish to work towards earning both ratings, both the Powerplant and the airframe, it's the minimum of 30 months of practical experience. You can do the math. It comes out to 4,800 hours. And that is while you are concurrently performing those duties, that's gaining the experience that's appropriate to both the Powerplant and the airframe. After you have documented the practical experiment, then you finally get to take the tests. And that's the written test, the oral, and the practical. Charlie, I know we had a couple of questions that we had prepared in advance. I was wondering if you could run the first one.
Well, Jim, I don't know if you got my email or not, but the first one, the first poll question we have is whether anyone has basically earned their certificate through practical experience like Jim has. So if you could just take a second and click on the yes or no button so we can get a sense of whether we have any experienced people that have done this themselves, or if Jim is the relative rarity of having done this. So with that, we've got about 65%, 70% of the votes in. We'll give you all just a second or two here more. All you have to do is reach up and click the button. And looks like we're getting all the votes in here. And we'll give everybody just a little bit more time. We got a few more votes going in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll results and share those results. And Jim, it looks like only about 4% of the people have actually earned their mechanic certificate through practical experience. So you're not alone, but it is a relative rarity for somebody to do that.
Yeah, Charlie, there's not a lot of us out here that have done it, but I just wanted to point out there's actually 2 other fellows right here on the staff where I work at that have taken the same route. So, living proof, it can be done.
Well, Jim, given the fact that we have over 290 people on tonight, there's obviously a lot of interest in this. And when you think about the fact that the home-built movement has over 31,000 aircraft certified in the U.S., there's a lot of people that probably have at least a good step towards the experience requirements, huh?
Yes, that's right. And that's what I hope we can talk about here, because I think you have a wonderful opportunity when you're involved in this to be able to document all of that practical experience and turn it into a certificate. The next slide that I have here talks about the experience requirements. I wanted to start, for the sake of comparison, with what happens in an AMT school. An aviation maintenance technician school under Part 147 can actually produce a licensed mechanic with both A and P certificates in 24 months or less. In fact, you've probably seen advertisements out there. Sometimes they even guarantee it in about 18 months' time, something like that. But that's going to be a really accelerated course. There's an awful lot that you do learn in school, and I don't want to take anything away from that. That's probably regarded as the best way to do this, and nobody ever questions when you go through school. But there's a lot of us that never had the opportunity to actually go to school, busy doing other things. So the next category there would be working at an FAA repair station, or working at an FBO, fixed base of operation, or even perhaps just working under the supervision of a certificated mechanic. So the requirements there, when you do it that way, is 18 months for doing either the airframe or the power plant, or 30 months if you're working towards earning both certificates, as mentioned previously on another slide. There's a third category, and that is practical experience that was gained through your service in one of the U.S. Armed Forces. And I'll talk about that more later. Just want to let you know that if you do have prior military experience, then you had a job code, an MOS, or something that's on a form DD-214, which actually translates into a code that may already have documented all the experience that you need. We'll talk about that more later. So this slide here has the paragraph that I think is probably the most important one, because it addresses the highlight, I'm sorry, going for the highlighter, that addresses the experience requirements. The A&P certification experience gained from the military, or work as an airframe or power plant mechanic, or work on the experimental amateur built aircraft, will be evaluated on its own merits. This paragraph is a little bit vague, and in fact it sounds like it's subject to some subjective type of evaluation, and in fact that is correct. And I want you to be aware of that sometimes decisions are made at a FSDO by an ASI, an aviation safety inspector, that might actually be contrary to what another FSDO would evaluate it as, or even a difference between two regions. So don't be surprised if you find that when you talk to somebody at FAA, they look for counsel from someone else in their office or at another FSDO or even in another region, and might actually come up with a different answer. So that can be disconcerting, to say the least. Just wanted to make you aware of that.
Jim, I think the key though is that there is a provision that allows for it, and so you kind of have to be your own advocate, correct?
Yeah, that's right. You definitely need to advocate for yourself in there. Now, I don't want to say anything bad or incorrect about FAA, because really for the most part I think that you will find that they're going to want to work with you, and especially when it comes to things like what's in the practical test standards. It's very objective. It's clearly spelled out what is required in here. The area that seemed to be subjective was the actual evaluation of the practical experience that you've gathered out there. Once you get over that hurdle, the rest of it is really straightforward. When you go down to the FSDO for the first time, you will meet with an ASI, an Aviation Safety Inspector. This person will probably end up becoming your mentor, or maybe another way of looking at that is you get assigned to his or her workload. That is the person that you will be reviewing your paperwork with. It requires this documentation of your practical experience and the 8610-2 application form. You'll bring that in partially filled out, and I do have an example of that form here later. After the satisfactory interview with that ASI, then you get to move on. So this is really the first part of a three-part process. And it has been my experience and experience of other people that I know that have gone through this process that it actually took several visits to the FSDO and working with your safety inspector before you finally got it all right, so that they would finally sign off on that 8610 form and allow you to move on and start studying to take those tests. Here is 8610-2. Now, I know this is kind of an eye test. I don't know if you can zoom in on this a little bit, but I wanted to go over this and show you a couple of things that are interesting. First of all, there's the this is the Airman Certificate, and it's this is an application for a certificate or a rating. And you can see that this person here, now this is an example, but this person here is applying for a mechanic with an airframe rating. So you can see that Mr. Samuel William Smith, there's all of his personal information, has filled this out. This is applicant information, the area 1. Okay, sorry about these squiggly lines. This is where it gets interesting, is in these two areas here of Category 2. And that is, are you going to be applying on the basis of experience gained through your civil experience or your military experience? There's also a third category in here, and that's letter of recommendation. By the way, let me go back up to the top again and point something out. Under the Airman Certificate, there was actually ratings. And you might already even be the holder of a repairman certificate. Repairman certificate is generally a rating that is used when you are employed at a repair station, an MRO, that's a maintenance repair organization, or perhaps this will entitle you to work at a manufacturer's maintenance facility. There's also ratings such as propeller or welding or gyro, or one here that's really close to our hearts, and that is experimental amateur built aircraft. You earn a repairman certificate which entitles you to do your inspections and major alterations on the aircraft that you have built. This would be the same form that you fill out to get that repairman certificate. Let me move back down here into this second area. If you are actually applying on the basis a letter of recommendation for repairmen. This would be something that your employer at a repair station or the manufacturing maintenance facility would do for you. This same form, if you had gone to school, you would be checking the box there, but that probably won't apply to us here. And then the third category on this form here is our record of experience. And that's really what I hope to be able to talk with you a little bit about tonight, is how to document that. Now, I thought this was a great example that FAA put in. By the way, this stuff is all available at FAA.gov. But you can see that Mr. Samuel Smith was applying based on his civil experience, and down here under the record of experience, he put down that he worked at Brown's Flying Service for a period of time, and here's some of the things that he did. Okay, now we're going to come back to this form again. You can see that he alters it, and I thought this was great because that really does represent the real world, that you came in once and the ASI asked you a whole lot of questions, and you went back home and kept digging to come up with more practical experience, and then you come back at a later date with that and document it and put it on the form, and the form is going to look different the second time. I zoomed in a little bit here just so that you can see, again, civil experience would be the box that we might check here if we were going to go that route. And you know, just like everything else, this information is all spelled out clearly. There really isn't any concern for them throwing a question at you that you wouldn't expect, because this is all part of freedom of information. You can see all of this stuff in here. By the way, let me point out, you know, there's the section that you can go to familiarize yourself. So when you do prepare to go on down to FSDO to have that initial meeting and subsequent meetings, you can always go back to the website and see what it is that they are going to be asking of you.
Jim, could you just state is it an AC that you're an advisory circular that you're getting this out of, or it's a little hard to read on my screen, so I thought if you read it out, that might help people.
Yeah, Charlie, actually, you can Google it, but if you want to take the direct route, go to FAA.gov and go to Airman Certification, and then and then there is a little search engine box, and put in mechanic and see what pops up. Now, if you want to just use 8610.4K, try that. Just put it into the Google search, and I think that you'll probably come right to this section here. So it's not difficult to find this information at all. Let me keep going. Here's this is category 3, record of experience, and you can see that they're giving you basically 3 rows to fill out. Now, if you worked maybe at one place for the last 30 months, you might be able to fill that in all on one row. But, well, if you're like me, I had to put in about 5 or 6 different sources of previous experience, and this little box here was not big enough to do that. And in fact, they come right out and tell you in the fine print here that if this is not enough space, make sure that you add an attachment. There's no problem doing that. This is where you fill in. That was easy, but here's really what you're after, is the inspector's signature. And that person is not going to sign off until they are sure that you have met the requirements. I'm trying to read this fine print too, that you have met the requirements of the time that it takes to take the written tests. So there it is. You can just Google 8610-2 and you will see this form pop up. Now, here's the form again. I mentioned that Mr. Samuel Smith came in there and he was a little bit light on previous experience. Now, by the way, remember last time he was applying for Airframe and he had lined out Powerplant. This time he's coming back and asking for his Powerplant as well. And you can see that down here in the record of experience category, Sam remembered that he worked for the U.S. Army. Like he could really forget that. And in fact, first time around he talked about working for Brown's Flying Service, but now he has attached a sheet with all kinds of additional information. And yeah, you know what, this time you got the sign off. So in this case, Mr. Smith has basically passed the hurdle. Now here's the example that comes from the FAA for this. Now this is a different guy here, actually. No, I'm sorry, it is Mr. Sam Smith again. And there's his Brown Flying Service experience, and there's what he did while he was in the Army. And this is still a pretty small description for what he did in the Army. So my guess is, let's go back just a second here. Of course, he's got a military specialty code. You see that in there? So that probably right there gave him 18 months, maybe it even gave him the full 30 months of experience based on his MOS code. So, you know, congratulations, Sam. You did it all. You got away with writing a pretty short story here on what the practical experience was. Now, here's my own. Again, this is the same form, and I don't mind sharing this with you. You can see that, well, there's my personal information up here. And I was applying for this on the basis of my civil experience. But unlike Mr. Smith in the previous one, I had to do a bunch of stuff. You know, like here, I actually worked for my dad. That was about a year and a half in that rotorway business. I worked for another 6 months for Burrell. I worked for a year over at Air Parts. I worked, what is that, a year and a half? No, more than 2 years, excuse me, at High Tech, and about a year and a half at Ptarmigan. When I added all that up, I did have enough practical experience. But you know what? It took a couple of trips here before my ASI, Mr. Woods, finally signed off on that. So that's just an idea. Now, by the way, you can see over here, I got one line descriptions of what I did. Well, I actually submitted letters from previous employers, and in fact one person had actually passed away, fellow that owned Air Parts, and I spoke with his widow. She remembered me, and she was kind enough to write a letter that basically testified that I had worked for her husband, and a short list of the things that I did while I was employed there.
Jim, on that note, William has a question that he's working for with the mechanic right now. Does he need the IA, authorization to sign off the time or anything?
Charlie, that's really a good question. I intended to mention that later, but it is not necessary to work with the holder of an IA. And for the folks that might not be aware, that IA stands for Inspection Authorization. The requirement is that a person works under the supervision of the holder of a mechanic certificate with appropriate rating. Okay, so if you were just interested in working on your airframe, you could be working under the supervision of the holder of a mechanic certificate with airframe only. And you know, there's actually a lot of guys out there that have just one rating or the other. But if you want to work on Powerplant, obviously, or work on your Powerplant rating, you need to be performing your practical experience or gaining your practical experience, which of course includes performing work while under the supervision of that mechanic who also holds the Powerplant rating. I hope that answered that. Here's a letter. This actually is a letter that my dad wrote to Mr. Woods. And by the way, he's a principal maintenance inspector. He's pretty high up there at the Scottsdale FSDO. But here's the key thing. This paragraph right here needs to kind of preface anything. And that, let me read it in case you can't see it if it's too small. It says, I understand that an applicant for a mechanic certificate must present documentary evidence satisfactory to the administrator, of at least 30 months of practical experience that is appropriate to the rating sought. This letter is written to document the practical experience that Jim has performed as I have witnessed. And then he goes on to talk about it. So during a time period, Jim did all these things, okay, and blah, blah, blah. You know, it all comes down here. So that at the very end, trust that this will help to document the years of practical experience that Jim has acquired in the field of aircraft maintenance and repair for the purpose of earning an airframe and power plant mechanic certificate. If I may be of further assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Folks, let me tell you, Mr. Woods, the PMI, contacted everybody that I had listed. So, you know, make sure that it's a good story, that it's factual, and that these folks understand that someone from the FAA will be contacting them to verify what has been written in this letter of testimony. Okay, this is like a letter of reference, only you don't want to be perjuring yourself or asking them to say anything that is not true.
Jim, I have a question on this one. I can't tell because I can't read the whole letter, but is he actually saying that you had X amount of hours, or is the assumption that you worked a 40-hour week for this period of time, or how does that work?
Charlie, yeah, I realize this is really an eye test and you can't read this letter here, but it actually says during a period from August through March, 18 months, okay, he operated a business, and it says in here somewhere that I was employed as full-time, okay, as our main builder repairman. Okay.
So interestingly,
there you go. There's 18 months of full-time. That was interpreted to be 160 hours a month times 18. Now, an interesting thing, I'll bring this up right now, this is a non-certificated engine, and this caused my PMI some heartburn because he was under the impression that practical experience on an engine needed to be work performed and experience with certificated power plant. There may be some people on this call, because I've had some conversations here recently about folks that have worked on light sport aircraft engines, which are not certificated, but they are approved as an ASTM standard. And I am not in a position to tell you whether or not the FAA recognizes that. I think that this is one of those areas that might be subjective, or let me back that up. How about maybe not defined at this time? So I can just imagine, you guys are all reaching for the phone right now. I'm not a lawyer. This is my impression. This is what I was told. I had to go and find, it wasn't hard for me because I've been working on a number of certificated airplanes, but my engine portion of this was not recognized because it was not a certificated engine, but because I did have experience on working with Lycomings and Continentals and some experience with Pratt & Whitney PT6 that pushed me over the top there. Wasn't a problem. But this is one of those areas, back to that paragraph that said will be evaluated on its own merits, that tends to leave a little bit of gray area there. Okay.
Jim, a couple of viewers have just mentioned that there is a zoom button in the lower right corner of their screen if they want to play with the zoom of the webinar. So
so they can zoom in and read this fine print?
Yeah, nothing for you to change, but just in case somebody viewing on their computer screen wants to try to zoom in to read more of the document, they can do that apparently.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
I just played around with it. It does work.
All right. Well, then I can leave this screen up for just a moment longer. I only have this one, page 2, and one other reference letter that I put in here. I helped my father write this. I just wanted to be sure that he wrote down the things that I knew needed to be addressed. I'm going to get to the required items a little bit further into this presentation, but let me tell you from experience and from other people that I know that have gone this same route that it sure helps if you can help your witness, the person that supervised you, write the letter to be sure that they mention the key things that you worked on. For example, let me start right here with his work for us included, and that was engine installations, engine electrical systems, lubrication systems, ignition and starting, fuel metering, fuel systems, cooling, exhaust, reduction systems, rotor systems. You know, that's not BS. That's what I really did. But it was important that the person from the FAA see that that is what I did, because there's a requirement that your practical experience has to touch 50% of the subjects that are on the list. And we'll look at that list here in a minute. Let me move on to just the second page here. You know, I mentioned that, and I read this verbatim, this last paragraph. It summarizes the year and a half of practical experience that I acquired for the purpose of earning the mechanic certificate. And your letters of recommendation need to have verbiage like this. Here's another letter that was written. This is not my father. This is a guy I worked for. By the way, Burl is pretty famous in Alaska because he holds a lot of STCs for Super Cub modifications, and he also has a manufacturing business. He's kind of like the godfather now of Aronca sedans. Anyway, Burl used the same kind of a lead-in paragraph. He's going to present some documentary evidence satisfactory to the administrator, and he talks a little bit about himself up here, but he comes down here and in this paragraph it talks about what I actually did. So Burl says, well, I did all these associated repairs that included working on Super Cubs and Cruisers and Cessna 180s and Beavers and stuff like that. Burl got a phone call also. So just be aware that the person that writes the letter of recommendation for you, the holder of a mechanic certificate with ratings appropriate to the experience, will, I believe for sure, be contacted by the FAA for verification. So, now you've seen this slide before because I used it at the beginning of this section. So to receive the credit, well, you will receive credit for your practical experience, but it will undergo a review. So if the documentation is adequate and you've got your partially filled out Form 8610, and it's kind of like an oral, but as long as you have a satisfactory interview with the airworthiness inspector, you will have documented your practical experience, and I will congratulate you because you've now made it over the first hurdle, the first of 3 hurdles. Okay, now the fun begins. You have just earned the right to take your written exams, and that yeah, this is fun. You're going to end up taking 3 written exams if you wish to earn both an airframe rating and a Powerplant rating. If you're going to take 2 if you only want a single rating, but you have to take a general. And let's say you want your airframe, your A rating, you're going to take a general and an airframe. Or if you wanted, let's see, just erase. Or if you just wanted, oops, sorry about that. I'm fat fingering here, sorry. Or if you just wanted the Powerplant rating, you're going to take Powerplant and general. And if you want them both, you will take general, Powerplant, and airframe. Okay. Now, this is the study material up here, the reference material. And by the way, you know, this stuff is available on the web. It might be a little bit awkward to try and read a big fat book like 8082-3. And here's an even fatter book. This is 4313. This is the white covered book, often frequently referred to as the Bible. And then also FAR 147. You might recall 147 is the AMT school information. But with those three sources of information, the 8882, the 4313, and referring to the FAR 147, you will see what is you're going to need to know to pass the written exams. So under the general curriculum, take a look at all these things here. You know, basic electricity, aircraft drawings, weight and balance, fluid lines and fittings, materials and process, ground ops, cleaning and corrosion, mathematics. Ooh, that sounds kind of scary. How about basics physics, even scarier? Maintenance forms and maintenance publications. Here's something that they're really going to drill on. Ooh, look at that crooked line. Privileges and limitations. Folks, in your practical experience, you needed to have already touched 50% of the items on this list. But when you take your test, I promise you, you will be tested on every item on this list. Now, the neat thing about testing, you may already know this, through the Freedom of Information Act, we get the test questions and the answers. Like if you hold a pilot certificate, you've already been down this road, you know that you can see all 1,000 questions that are potentially could be asked of you for the private written test. Well, it's the same thing here. You're going to take a 100-question test here on general curriculum. You can take a 100-question test on airframes and a 100-question test on power plants as well. So you are going to at least learn to memorize 1,000 potential questions. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way to learn, but this is what it takes to pass this test. So there's the general curriculum and the items that you will be studying for. Here's the next category. This is airframe, okay, and there's two parts to airframe. There's structures and then there's systems. Systems is on the next slide, but here we have structures. So now again, when you were doing your practical experience, you needed to have touched 50% of this list. So let's just say that you built yourself a wooden airplane. Well, I am sure that you also painted it, and then you assembled it, and then you inspected it. Okay, so there's half. Or maybe you didn't do wood. Maybe you did rag and tube. Okay, maybe you so you had aircraft covering, you had welding, of course, and then you still had assembly and airframe inspection. Maybe you didn't build yourself a fabric-covered airplane. Maybe you built yourself a RV-6, or maybe you built a Long Easy or something like that. Well, you still painted it, and then you still did some assembly and some airframe inspection. Okay, so you've touched it before, or you wouldn't be this far. But now when you're studying for the written test, again, I promise you, you are going to be asked a lot of questions on all of these categories. Whether you ever actually had any experience doing it or not, you will be tested for the knowledge on this.
So Jim, William has a question about, would an online course, be helpful for studying for the written? I think like
absolutely. Yep.
Is that what you did?
I did both, and I'll get to that here a little in a few more slides. I'm just pointing out that these are the regs that you will be tested in these subject areas under airframe structures. Now here's the other part of airframe is systems and components. Well, I say if you built something, it had landing gear, it had brakes, right? So there's hydraulic. It might have even had a heater. I'm sure you had some instruments in there, and radios are nice. Again, this is assuming you're getting your practical experience from building something. If you've been working on already built airplanes, whether they're home built or certificated, you're still touching all these things: fuel system, Electrical system? Yeah, probably. And if you had electricity, you probably had position and warning stuff. These other two here, ice, you know, well, that's heated prop and inflatable leading edge boots, or rain control, windshield wipers. Not too many GA, general aviation aircraft, have those systems, not in the lower end, the lighter end, and fire protection system. You know, that's both detection and suppression. Well, you might not have run into things like those last two while you were building your home built, or maybe while you're working on your lighter GA aircraft. But again, you will be tested and must have knowledge of those systems. So those are the subject areas that there will be testing on. Now, Powerplant, same thing. It's broken into two different areas. One is the theory and maintenance, and then the other one is systems. So, you know, most of us all probably messed around with a recip engine first, and you were definitely working on inspection. So that there's half. Actually, that's 2/3, isn't it? 66%. Trying to get turbine experience is a little more difficult in GA anyway. Now, if your experience comes from the military background, that's all about turbines, so wouldn't be any problem there. In fact, maybe it'd be a turnaround for the guys with military experience. They might not have had a chance to work on piston engines. But anyway, you qualified in here already because you've been working with engines. Now, though, whether all of your time was on recips, you're still going to find that there's an awful lot of information that you need to know about turbine engines in order to pass the test in that subject area. That's the theory part. Here's the systems and components. Just like before in airframes, you know, we come back here, now we got engine instruments. Here's fire protection. Okay, yeah, you're going to get tested on that, whether or not you had any previous experience. Electrical, of course, lubrication, ignition, fuel metering. You know, that could be carburetors and fuel injectors. Fuel system, that's tanks and valves and tubing. Here's induction, you know, the air intake system. Here's cooling. Normally that's air cooling, so that's all about baffles. Might be water cooling. I don't know what your experience might have been. Exhaust, oh yeah. Reversers, well, if we're talking about turbine engines. Propellers, oh, probably. Unducted fans, that's not so common, is it? And APUs, don't you wish you had one of those in your home built? But again, these are all categories that you need to be well versed on to take that written test. Okay, now I think this addresses a question that William had earlier. Okay, there's really two ways that you can get ready for this thing. You can do a home study course, which also might be online. Boy, sorry about this squiggliness. This is like writing with an Etch-a-Sketch. Home study, you know, it could be books, it could be DVDs. Yeah, I should put online in there. But regardless of which particular vehicle you're using there, you're going to be taking practice tests, and that's good because it's going to warm you up for the real thing. Okay, you can also drink from the water hose, the fire hose here, through an accelerated school. I actually did both. I took the home study course route first, and I bought the King series of, they were actually VHS back then, now they're all DVD. But I had that whole set of VHS tapes, and there was practice tests, and I actually could take practice tests by faxing them in. Boy, that's starting to show my age, right? I know that they are online now. And, you know, I did that over the course of it took me almost a year to do all this study because it was part-time after hours, you know, trying to have a life also. But I found that when I really thought I was ready to go, I wasn't too sure how I was going to do it. So I decided I ought to go drink from that fire hose as well. And I went on over to a place, I don't know if I'm not going to give them a plug, but they were really great. It was AvTech Exams over in Riverside, California. And I took that 8-day course, and I'm really glad I did, because I took each one of those written tests probably 3 or 4 more times. And I was consistently scoring in the high 90s. In fact, there was a couple of tests that I scored 100 on. So at least my short-term memory was pretty good. I could remember all of those questions that I had been taking. But I am really glad that I had spent a year of going through the home study course along with the 4313 and the 8082, the FAR 147s. See, one way or the other, though, after you have taken your course, you receive an endorsement to take the exams. That's what it's all about. Now, it's just like, if back to the private pilot analogy, you know, you had to have an endorsement from your ground instructor, or perhaps your ground instructor was also your CFI, your flight instructor. But you were not allowed to take the written test. You couldn't sit for the test unless you had an endorsement that somebody said you were ready to take the test. Well, that's what you get, either through that home study course or through an accelerated school. When you have received that endorsement, now you will take your exam, and the exam is taken online these days, as you probably know. You go to an Airman Knowledge Testing Center, and I think they're also known as CAT, like computer-assisted testing systems. And you take your exam, and you are scored almost immediately. That's kind of neat. You know, it's a nearly instant justification. Now, this next page here shows that. This is the test report. By the way, so it's Airman. See this Airman Computer Test Report, and this one happens to be for the Powerplant, Aviation Mechanic Powerplant. So you can see that Mr. David John Jones has taken this. He scored an 89. That's a pass. That's good. And just like all of these FAA tests, if you miss a question, you get the, well, down here, these are questions just which were answered incorrectly, and these are the general subject areas. And you, back to the private pilot exam scenario, just like that, any knowledge areas that you have missed, you have to have additional instruction. Okay, so I don't know what these are, but let's just say that, oh, I'm just going to look at category J02. That might happen to be propeller. Maybe you missed a question on a propeller in the J category in the individual topic number 2. Well, we can go back and see what a question J02 is. It may not be the exact question that you saw, the one that you missed, but we get a pretty good approximation of what that is. And the person that gives you the additional instruction down here needs to go back and cover the knowledge in the area that you answered that question incorrectly. And by the way, this can be done by the holder of a mechanic certificate with the rating appropriate to that. So a holder of a mechanic with the P, the power plant, could go back and give additional instruction to Mr. David John Jones and then sign it off. And you keep this form, because you take this then for the final round, which is when you go and have your oral and practical test. Okay, so we're over the second set of hurdles. The first set, remember, was documenting your practical experience. Now the second set is you've actually studied and taken these tests and passed them successfully. So congratulations. And that is a lot of work. Okay, and here's the last part. Okay, O and P, that stands for oral and practical tests. And the general, oh, and by the way, see this thing, PTS? That is Practical Test Standards. Those are published. You can see them. And it's just like back to the private pilot scenario, you know, when you were studying for your check ride on that airplane, I sure hope that your flight instructor showed you this PTS, because that way there's no surprises on check ride day. You have been studying and practicing to maintain a standard for your flight check. Well, you get to practice and study so that you can maintain a professional standard here when you take your oral and your practical test. See, the person that will administer this test, a designated maintenance examiner, is obligated to follow the PTS. So he's not, or she is not going to throw something at you that you haven't had a chance to be prepared for, because there's no secrets in all of this. This is freedom of information. So the general book is the 8081-26, and the Airframe Practical Test Standards book is the -27, and the Powerplant Practical Test Standards book is the -28. If you're out there, you can Google these right now or bring them up. You can see that they're pretty big. They're large files. If you want to completely use up a printer cartridge, I guess you could go ahead and print them out. Or you can probably also find these at a local, like a NOAA, or some FBOs keep these books around. Not too many, but you can find them. There are multiple sources to purchase these. Anyway, that is getting ready for the O&P. Okay, now for us that are taking this practical experience route, we can only schedule our oral and practical tests after we have already successfully completed the written exam. For those folks that are going through a Part 147 AMT school, they have the option to take the O&P tests before they complete all the written stuff. I guess maybe that just works out better, and maybe it's a big school with a lot of kids and there's a limited number of examiners or something like that. Anyway, we must schedule the O&P tests after we have completed the written exams. And by the way, that's after successful completion of those written exams. This O&P is conducted by a DME, a designated mechanic examiner, and it is very similar to the airman test. I keep referring back to what it was like to earn the private pilot. So you're going to want their fee right up front. And folks, I want to be realistic about this. Failure is possible. In other words, if you bomb out, if you bust this test, he doesn't give you your money back. You can be rescheduled to pick up the test at a later date after you've had some additional remedial training. But if you bust out, your oral or your practical is done. That's just like busting a check ride, because you can't do your steep turn or your heading was greater than plus or minus 10 degrees. Okay, so reality check. But that's the oral and the practical. Now, here's the backside of this 8610 form that we've been looking at. And you can see here's the guy that he was the DME that I work with, Mr. Randall McKinley, over in Santa Monica, California. He would write down the list. We did an oral test, and there was, we did the general, that's general, airframe and Powerplant, and then you did oral and practical, and then we went right into aircraft structures, and I can't even read this fine print. How about airframe structures and airframe systems and components, and then we did power plant theory and maintenance, and then we went right into power plant system and components. And I am so happy that the X's are in the box that says pass. And I was approved. And I had attachments, of course, which is a report of the written test with the remedial training, and Form 8610, which, by the way, is the form. We've already filled out the front side of this thing. It'd be hard not to turn this form in. And Mr. McKinley signed it off. There was 2 last questions. Have I ever held, have I ever had a certificate suspended or revoked? Answer, no. And the last one, have I ever been convicted of drugs? Answer, no. Signed it off and got my temporary certificate. This is what the computer-generated temporary certificate looks like here. You can see that this fella passed. He got his mechanic certificate with airframe and Powerplant rating. And I think they're required within 120 days that you have the real deal. The plastic card will show up. So here's my piece of paper that I got, mechanic, airframe, PowerPoint, and there's the real deal there. That's what it looks like. That is what you're after. There's the goal. Congratulations, you've made it through. Now, I hope that I haven't made it sound more difficult than it is. You know, they don't give this one away, but it's definitely possible you can do this. I actually thought that one of the more challenging parts was just to add up all the practical experience, which gave me the right then to take the tests. The tests were not that difficult. In fact, I enjoy learning, and I learned an awful lot. And I thought I knew a lot from my practical experience. And as I got into doing the study for those written tests, well, I realized, you know, how much more I needed to learn. And, you know, I've earned this certificate, and I realized that it also, like they say, is a license to learn as well, because you continue to learn doing this job as you grow. So that is the conclusion of my presentation here. I guess there probably are some questions, and you know how to send those questions in.
Jim, we've got time for questions, so you don't get off the hook
sure.
that easy. And you're right, we do have quite a few here. Here's a good one. John wants to know, must the practical experience absolutely be from being employed by a company, or is it possible to get this experience by hiring an A&P to work with you or supervise you on rebuilding your own aircraft, or could you volunteer somewhere, you know, working with an A&P or something of that sort?
Charlie, that is a terrific question. I think the answer would be D, all of the above. You are not required to be in the employ of someone, you know, because, well, think about this. You know, you can build your own airplane, and if you document that, you have the 4,800 hours in there. You know, you've heard these stories of guys that spend 20 years. It's way more than 4,800 hours. So not necessary to be employed by somebody. What is necessary, though, is that if you are not building your own, then you must be working under the supervision of the holder of the mechanic certificate. Okay, and that requires documenting that. And you know, there's guys that actually keep a logbook. It doesn't have to be a fancy logbook that looks like your aircraft logbook. It could really just be a, you know, a notebook or collection of things. Maybe even you know, save it electronically. But you have to be able to verify that you have achieved these minimum number of hours of practical experience. I think another part of that question was volunteering. Yeah, absolutely. You know, wouldn't that be fun to have a volunteer job like at CAF and work on warbirds or something like that? Just make sure that you've got somebody that you know, prearrange this up front so that you're not springing this on somebody and asking them afterwards to go back and vouch for you having been there for this long period of time and done all these various things. You know, see if you can work with a mechanic who will be your mentor. You might have to do something nice for that person, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to that end, we have volunteer opportunities here, maintaining the B-17. We have a volunteer night. But I think it would probably be a good idea to have those supervisions signed off as you go, as opposed to waiting and thinking, oh, I'll wait and I'll get my, you know, 2,000 plus hours in. Because if the thing goes by the boards at that, you know, somewhere along the line, you don't want to lose documentation for that experience, right?
Right. Good point, Charlie.
I mean, you had you had somebody die on you, right?
Yeah, fortunately the widow was still available.
Okay. Chris has a question. Over the course of 10 years, he's worked sporadically, part-time with A&Ps doing annuals, rebuilds, restorations, you know, and then doing his own work on his Cub and Super Cub, and he has a parts business for that. how does he go about documenting all that? I mean, what did you see?
Well,
Some of the examples you showed were pretty brief.
Mm-hmm.
But
Charlie, I think Chris's experience might fall into two different categories. One was he was working under the supervision of people in all those various jobs over 10 years, but it sounds like he was also doing owner preventive maintenance items, the kind of thing that is permissible under Part 43, Appendix D. There's like 27 different things
yes,
that the holder of a pilot certificate can do. So, okay, the first half, Chris, you got to go back and talk to those people that you worked under their supervision and see if they will be willing to certify in the form of a letter that you did work for them for X number of hours or calendar time period, and that the categories of repairs or experience that you did while you were working under their supervision. Now, the owner preventive maintenance stuff, there's no such thing as flat rate, but you might consider that doing oil changes is, maybe that's a 2-hour job, and you can put together a whole bunch of 2-hour jobs. You may have participated in repairs on your own airplane under the supervision of an A&P, and that person could sign you off for that, or at least confirm that you've spent that amount of time working under their supervision. And then there's also that category of doing owner-assisted annual inspections. And an annual can easily be about a 40-hour project. And in fact, some people think they're lucky if they get away with only 40 hours. Other people, kind of like a drive-by annual, and you get it all done in 8 hours. That's only if everything is really good. You always end up with additional maintenance stuff that goes over and beyond just what the inspection does. The inspection is pretty easy. It's what you find as a result of inspections. And there's a lot of folks that do work under their A&P IA. Remember, it takes a holder of an IA to do the annual inspection. Get that person to recognize the time that was spent, and maybe you need to help them write a letter here too. Or if you want to go back and create a logbook that says that you performed X amount of hours on this date doing these things A, B, and C, that's the way to do it. That's what your ASI, the Aviation Safety Inspector over at FSDO, is going to be looking for.
Okay, Harry has a question. Does your experience ever expire? He was in the military, and it goes back to the 70s. Can he still use that?
Yes. Wow, what a great question. I forgot to mention that earlier. Experience never expires. As long as you're able to document it or find that person who's hopefully still alive that will write that letter for you, your experience has no expiration date. The FAA will recognize the prior experience. Just, you need to document it.
Okay, I do want to launch one more poll question if we could, because I'm interested in the answer to this question. We didn't do it while we were going along. And I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now. It's, what do you want to do with your mechanic certificate? We have a lot of people that are looking at getting their mechanic certificate through practical experience. And I think I know the answer to this, but do you want to work for an airline? Do you want to work for an FBO, start your own business, be a charter pilot mechanic, which is, I think, what you're doing right now, Jim, correct?
That is correct.
Or do you simply just want to be able to work on your own certificated aircraft going forward to keep your costs down, and probably to know more about the work that's done on the aircraft? So I'll give everybody just a few more seconds to get their votes in, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. So I'll give everybody just a couple of more seconds here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, and we will share the results. And it's pretty much as I expected. About 80% want to work on their own aircraft. 14% are interested in doing their own business. And then the others are, nobody wants to work for the airlines, apparently. I guess that works a little too mundane for our group of individuals here tonight. A lot of questions, Jim, on getting copies of the slides. And normally, I know when I present, I don't really like to give away the slides themselves. You can definitely go back and watch the recording, but if anybody was interested, or I don't know if that's something you're willing to do, or do you want them to email you? What do you think on that?
Charlie, I'd be happy to make those slides available.
Okay. Do you have an email address that they should send those to?
Mm-hmm. Or they can also
send their
visit my
request.
website.
Okay. Okay. So right there. Okay. All right. Let's see here. If you're self-employed, Jim says, what if I'm self-employed? I'm a kit dealer and run an assistance center overseeing, my customers' work. I've built other aircraft myself. How would I get someone to sign off my experience?
Oh boy, that's difficult to answer. Remember that paragraph that sounded so vague about the evaluating it on its own merit? I would actually suggest that this person go and visit the FSDO and speak with an aviation safety inspector and get this process started. This is kind of like unsupervised supervision, because this guy he's looking at his customer's work, so he's supervising, but he's not necessarily working under the supervision of the holder of a mechanic certificate. And so that's where it seems a little bit gray to me, and I would sure like to get a ruling from the FSDO as to what they will accept or how they would like to see that documented. Because, see, usually the documentation has to come from this third party, this holder of a mechanic certificate, and I don't know how, in what form they would like to see this certified experience letter of recommendation.
Okay. Let me see here. So there really, Mark has a kind of a similar question. Is there a proper way to document experimental construction experience?
And well, I've addressed that here. That I suggested the lead paragraph that was actually talking about recognizing that we need to document practical experience for the purpose of earning the mechanic certificate. Then in the body of the letter of recommendation, you need to actually specifically talk about the categories that you have experience in, and you need to identify those categories from the list of required subjects.
Okay, Chris has a question about excuse me, how you go about finding your designated mechanic examiner and about how much are the fees.
The list of DMEs is available through the local FSDO. They maintain a list because these folks have to have their own certificate. They are a designee. They are tested on a regular basis. I'm not sure what the duration of their authorization is. Might be 2 years at a time. It's just like designated pilot examiners, DPEs, do the same thing. So you get that list from the FSDO. The fees vary, but my guess is that right now it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about $400. Now, by the way, that brings up something else that I guess I didn't mention this earlier, but when you go in for your oral and practical, you better be prepared to spend some time. There's actually, I've talked to a number of guys that have earned their mechanic license, and it went into day 2. My own personal experience, my oral lasted about 3 or maybe 3.5 hours. And then the DME that I was working with, Mr. McKinley, actually, I think he had a customer's airplane in his shop that day. But I had to do things that I was going right down the list. Now, he had a couple of fixtures, and I did things like I installed and removed rivets, and I adjusted some cable tension, and he wanted to see how pretty my turnbuckle safety wire was. But then we started working on somebody else's airplane, and we determined inspection requirements from the logbook, and we knew it had a mag problem. We took it off and reset internal timing and reinstalled it. We went through corrosion. This was in for a radio installation, And although most of the work was done on the radio, I still had to research and fill out a Form 337 and do a new weight and balance. And, be prepared. This is the real practical side of the biz. And, I've heard guys say that they had to come back the next day for another half a day or even a whole day to go through the practical side of this thing. So, you might ask around. The reason why I'm saying this, maybe Mr. McKinley was extra tough or extra diligent. Maybe there's an easier guy out there. I can tell you, as a flight instructor, I know there are certain designated pilot examiners that I hear are real hard asses. I don't want to send my students over to them. But I'm not looking for Easy Abe or anything like that. It's up to the mechanic examiner as to, it's kind of subjective at that point on some of the practical things, because they get to choose from the long list of things. And obviously some items are easier than others.
Okay. Ed has a question, and I think you might know the answer to it, because I think we had this issue come in prior to the presentation. How does it work with the light sport repairman certificate with the maintenance rating, the one that allows you to do commercial work? Does this experience count, and can the LSRM sign off his own documentation experience and recommendation?
Yes, Charlie. I just went down that route a couple of weeks ago with somebody who is the holder of a light sport repairman with maintenance rating, and we were looking up the Part 65 numbers. Yes, that experience will count as the practical experience towards the mechanic certificate. The question that we had run into, and I addressed this at the beginning of our presentation tonight, the light sport aircraft had an engine that is ASTM certified, and it wasn't clear on that. Had some interesting conversation with some other folks that are in the business of training light sport repairmen, and I don't know how FAA views the ASTM standard power plant, but the question of whether light sport experience counts was addressed in a Part 65, and I'm sorry, I just don't have the paragraph, chapter, and verse to give you. That was a long answer to a short question. I guess really the short question needs to be, yeah, it counts. Maybe some qualification.
Okay, a couple of questions related to experience gained overseas. Joe actually asked specifically about he's got apparently experience in the British Royal Air Force, but I know another person just asked if they're overseas, will that count?
I can't give you an answer on that. You probably better go and talk to the ASI at the FSDO. I don't know if there's some sort of reciprocal agreement between the United States government and another nation as regarding their their equivalent of the MOS, or if there's their equivalent of the DD-214 form. This is the kind of item that is evaluated on its own merit.
So that facts and circumstances, there's probably some discretion at the examiner level, right?
Yes, Charlie. I hate to use that word discretion, because that sounds subjective, but I think that this is an example of where that discretion is used.
Okay. Shannon has a question. I'm interested in becoming an A&P, or not so interested in becoming an A&P, but more of becoming a better, well-informed, more qualified home builder. Besides AC 4313, etc., for information on methods, what would be the best way to achieve that goal? Would it be feasible, possible to offer to work part-time at a repair facility for cheap in return for some practical training on how to do things the right way? I mean, you've kind of been through the whole, built your own stuff, then went on and did some of stuff for other people. Do you have any suggestions for Shannon?
Well, I think going to work somewhere on the cheap. I hate to think that it's on the cheap, but that's a wonderful way to gain some experience. If you're really interested in something in particular, I guess I can't think of any better way to do that. Like if you really like helicopters, go work on helicopters, or if you really like float planes, go down to the lake and hang around those folks. But it sometimes is really hard to get that job because those folks are running a business and they probably don't really like the idea of doing training. They may take on a trainee that's working for the cheap, but you're not going to be doing the glamorous stuff. You're going to be down there washing the bellies of airplanes and other things. So be aware of that. I would also like to suggest, though, as an alternative, hey, how about one of those online mechanic training courses? For example, the King School, which I do have some experience with. Boy, there's a wealth of information in there. There's really good material that goes along with that. I know there are probably others in addition to King, so I don't want to be slighting anybody else out there. But that would give you really broad experience, and I think the bottom line is it would probably make you a better maintainer of your own aircraft. Certainly you've gained a lot of knowledge. Things maybe that you don't have on the airplane that you're flying today, but I think that would definitely broaden your horizon, really introduce you to the world, how much there really is out there in the way of systems and components and things like that in aviation maintenance.
Tim would like to know if American citizenship is required for this certificate.
Yes.
Okay. And if you want to go for like avionics repair, is that different?
Well, you get, remember we had repairmen? The avionics is a rating under a repairman certificate. I guess, I should have said avionics when I had said propeller or gyro or welding. This might offend the avionics people out there, because you're lumped in with doing those blacksmith trades. But you get a repairman certificate for avionics, so it's the same form you use.
Okay. Okay, Charles would like to know, can a DER that inspected your experimental aircraft for its airworthiness the certificate, can they give you a letter of experience for your home-built work? Jim? Test one. Jimmy, you still with me? Apparently we have everybody but our presenter Jim right now. I don't know what happened, but I tell you what, since we did lose Jim Moss at the end here, I think I'm going to have to call this a night on this presentation. Luckily we were through virtually all of our questions, or we still have a lot of questions, but I was actually looking at wrapping this up tonight anyway. But I want to thank Jim for being here tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and unfortunately with that I'm going to wrap it up. But if you wanted to get copies of the slides, contact Jim. Go to his website, northside-aviation.com, and send him an email. And he had promised that he would get slides back to you. If you have any other questions for Jim, again, email him at his website. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Sorry about the technical glitch at the end, and I want to thank Jim for his time. Good night, everyone.